Hello and welcome to another episode of Consume Community. We are back with our cup of chats talking to various people from the industry and our community about topics that matter to us. So today we've got Asian Leadership Collective, Jasmine Lee, to tell us a little bit about why representation matters for the East and Southeast Asian community. So, Jasmine, do you want to tell us a little bit about Asian Leadership Collective?
Yes, of course. And of course, thanks, Hannah, for having me here. I'm super excited to chat about Asian Leadership Collective and the work that we do. So, Asian Leadership Collective is a social enterprise business founded in 2020. Its main mission is to amplify ESEA leadership representation in the UK and to address basically the lack of not only representation in leadership and executive roles, but also to address the lack of accurate data and research that hasn't been able to give us like a really good picture or accurate picture of what ESEA leadership looks like in the UK's corporate world. So that's the gist of ALC and what we do. My involvement with Asian Leadership Collective started last year. I actually discovered ALC around the autumn of last year, and that was through ALC's ESEA Eats campaign and initiative, which is a fantastic campaign that takes place in November, and it's a great space to celebrate ESEA cultures and food and heritage. It actually started out as an Instagram hashtag, and it's very recently surpassed, I believe, 13,000 posts and uses in the Instagram on Instagram, and which is great to see that it's grown. It's on its third year now, I believe, and last year was how I got involved on the content team. And on that team, I had the opportunity to interview various people who make positive contributions to the ESEA communities in the UK. And it was not only a joy to be a part of that, it was also great to learn from these people, also to learn from the other volunteers on the team. Um, this year I am continuing my involvement as a volunteer on the full-time team. So that is a general summary of ALC and how I came to be involved in it.
And we love an acronym, that's for sure. So yeah, if so we have previously spoken to Anna, we've interviewed Anna. Anna was like one of my first ESA friends that found me during the pandemic. Like so many of us, we made pandemic friends online, Instagram friends. So we have spoken to her briefly about her career and about setting up Asian Leadership Collective and about ESA Eats, which is a great hashtag and is definitely worth having a look at if you've never looked at it before, because you will be inundated with glorious food, which I'm very lucky to have my own food brand, Little Yellow Rice Co. That was a real vehicle for us to showcase like Peranakan cuisine. But if you're going to look at it, warning that you will end up hungry. And also, yeah, I think it's really worth noting that Asian Leadership Collective is volunteer based, which really shows the need for these communities and these organisations. So, with that in mind, tell us a little bit about why East and Southeast Asian groups and leaders need to be represented in the workplace. So, from my perspective, I've previously spoken about. I was just listening back to my old podcast, Other, in the Figurative Box, about how growing up I didn't really see role models that were similar to me. So I would be interested to hear other perspectives around why the why you've set up the community and been doing these works for Asian Leadership Collective.
Of course. First of all, I just want to shout out the fact that The hashtag ESEA Eats campaign was co-founded by Anna Chan, founder of ALC, but also Georgie Ma, Chinese chip
Yes.
girl. Didn't want to leave anybody out of there.
Yeah, who also has an excellent podcast.
Absolutely. I just want to give credit where credit's due.
Sure.
But yes, on the notion of like the importance of really the importance of representation, as I actually had mentioned this earlier, so I spoiled this question, my answer to this question a little bit. But um, underrepresentation and in general representation with ESEA communities in leadership and executive roles, I think the problem stems from like two major issues, which is just the the representation in general. We don't see these leaders, and even now, it's funny that you said growing up, because of course now I think the last few years have been so pivotal for ESA communities, not just in the UK but all over the world, especially in film. We can think of Parasite and Everything Everywhere All at Once, right?
Yeah.
Those may be the first that come to mind. um so the first issue is the number of representation, and even though we've made such great strides, even now we just don't visibly, we can say that we don't see enough of of ESCA in these leadership roles. But also in terms of the data, it's not just that the data proves that it's the numbers aren't good enough and that we're not seeing enough of ESCA in these roles. It's just the fact that the research does not paint an accurate portrayal. So there's a really fantastic article that goes into this on ALC's website, and it shares the fact that ESEA are often like conflated with other minority communities, and this may show numbers that mislead the reader. It can be misleading to show that there are more than they really are, because um, at the end of the day, if the data conflates East and Southeast Asians with other demographics, we're really not getting a nuanced image of like who are in these leadership roles if we're all just like bunched together in this BAME groups. So that's a gist of what the article goes into, and I would definitely encourage anybody listening to look at that article. And a report was done as well with ALC to talk more about this and look more into the numbers about this and how we can do better. So yeah, that's in a sense why representation is amongst East and Southeast Asians in these roles is so important to talk about. Not just a matter of seeing us more in those roles, but also like why isn't research being done? Why hasn't like more accurate research and work been done with our data? And I think that there's still quite a bit of work left to be done to answer those questions.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good point. Like, so obviously we've just seen the success of Everything Everywhere All at Once, which um for me, I think was one of the first films that I felt truly resonated with a sense of my identity. But again, it's it's because that has visibility, but it's not. It doesn't check all of my boxes, but it was a start. And I think that's definitely a very important point. Is that the data is so important at the moment. We do check those boxes, which is what I've spoken about previously. It's been the other box, which is a nightmare for me. There isn't enough data to break down to have that very important information about what all the different the diaspora, all the different people are out there. Those stats are very a very kind of overview to show that yes, there may have been an improvement, but actually on the ground, are people in roles that are kind of progressing up their career? Are they seeing those people in leadership roles that that they look at as role models? or is that still far and few between? And I would guess that the data is indicating that that's not we're not able to find those people that are um, the role models and the figureheads that we're looking for within our industry. That's definitely too specific. Um, so yeah, I think I will put the link in as well for the article below. But yeah, it's really important work to have that done so that we can see, those on paper. We can see the statistics, we can see the data, we can see what it means. Um, so, in terms of actual leadership itself, why do you feel, why does Asian Leadership Collective exist to look at representation in specifically in leadership roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually surprised to find out that before the creation of ALC, before that was founded in 2020, there was no UK based common interest company with with the same mission. And I think that it's been a long time coming. I am from Canada, so of course, like each country and culture has its own nuances, but I think it's pretty fair to say that we can say between Canada, the UK, and any other, um, Western colonial like country with colonial history, that we're not going to see the representation that is deserved in these leadership roles and reflects, our demographics. And I think that honestly, I joined ALC not really knowing what I signed up for. I just really like food and I do content. I've done content for a long time. So I was very happy to become a part of a community in the UK. But it's grown into my understanding of like ESEA and how that ties into ALC's work has grown. And I think that as someone who is like an early professional, it has done a lot to help not only give me a network of support, but also resources. Resources, support, and opportunities that I would not have had I not joined in the first place. So I think that um, for me personally, that really to me that's why Asian Leadership Collective is really important, and not just ALC. I have to give credit to other organizations out there who like other grassroots initiatives
Yeah,
who are
please share, tell us.
yeah. I mean, of course, you've mentioned Little Yellow Rice Co., which I actually heard about from a friend in London before I had ever spoken to you. So,
Oh, tell us the friend, we'll give him a discount.
oh my gosh, yeah, her name is, you know what, I will shout her out. Her name is Celine Lowe. She has a
I
really cool brand. Yeah, she makes some really cool stuff. And if you're ever in like the cool markets in London, you'll probably find her somewhere there.
Yeah, with Lo, I've got some with Lo. She also makes some really cool. Um, I've got a key ring that she sent me. That's also for like self-defense, which is good for me because I do tend to wander about on my own sometimes. So
Yeah,
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 I know Celine Widlow is a really cool brand and also so important because she is out there at those at the markets like Bazaar Market and stuff, which is good for representation because she is fighting that stigma of East and Southeast Asian women being meek, and she is not. She is fierce. She is badass. So she is fighting the cause as well, but also being creative and doing her own thing.
yeah, and you can really pick her out from a crowd. Like she really embodies her brand.
Yes.
And you would not miss her if you ever saw her. So
Yeah.
highly recommend at with Low, I believe, Instagram and TikTok as well.
Yeah.
But also on a more serious note, I think On Your Side is their, I would say I'd only heard about them over the last few months, but they're they're what they do is provide support for ESEA for the ESEA community overall, but also individuals who experience hate crimes or incidences
Yeah.
of violence. And I think that's really important because I believe the statistic was that like COVID-based violence against East and Southeast Asians increased like it was it went up 179%, but it was because of like the impact of COVID-19 and how COVID-19 became like the face of like an East and Southeast Asian person, which is of course horrible. And um, it's
Yeah.
hard to forget about that, even though it feels like the pandemic is behind us, even though COVID's still around. But yeah, I think it's important that organizations like that exist. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to them and the work
I
that
saw
they do.
them recently as well pop up, and I definitely agree. Like COVID-19 was definitely the vehicle um, to exacerbate an underlying issue, which had its good and its bad. It brought a lot of the community together. It brought a lot of us together to meet people that we wouldn't necessarily have met, but and it also brought to the forefront an underlying issue of kind of racism that we kind of let pass a lot of the time, microaggressions and things like that that we hadn't really recognised or maybe didn't know um, how to kind of talk about it or identify it. But yeah, I saw that. We'll pop that as a resource as well. And just kind of coming around to talk about yourself a little bit, if you don't mind. So you're saying you're early on in your career, which is, if you want to tell us a bit about it, and also what challenges do you feel you've faced in this today in this stage of your career?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So I am early, but also not in my career. I've been a journalist for nearly a decade now, or was a journalist. I'm kind of in that weird space where I am transitioning out of that, where I both have and have not been a journalist in my last role. As I said earlier, I'm from Canada. I grew up in Toronto, which is, but more specifically, I grew up in Markham, which is, if anybody has heard of it, it's basically the equivalent of growing up in like Hong Kong, but without the skyscrapers and like the overpopulation
Okay.
and condensed. It's very. Um, I grew up in a very much like a bubble of kids and families from the Hong Kong and Chinese diaspora. And I think I was very, very lucky too, because I grew up with like surrounded by um the language like Cantonese, like the food from Hong Kong, and like the best of that. Some people joke that the Chinese food's better in Markham than it is in like Hong Kong.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, so that's my upbringing, and I started in music journalism when I was 17. That changed when I was in university in Montreal. I went to McGill University, and that changed into journalism of international affairs, political science. So that's where I pivoted my interests. At that time, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, and after I graduated, I was offered a full-time position to work as part of an independent publication based in Hong Kong. I had worked for this publication previously as an intern back in 2017. Was a very, very lucky experience to have. I was based in Hong Kong for 3 months, and it absolutely changed my life. And it was great to be welcomed back. But that being said, coming on to what you're asking about challenges, I would say that that was one of the biggest challenges I've faced in my career so far, because I joined in August 2019. And if anybody knows about Hong Kong in August 2019, it was a very difficult time with the anti-extradition law protests. So it was a very tumultuous time to be taking on that role. And it also required a lot of emotional labor as well. So it was not only stressful due to the nature of the work, but also my emotional ties to Hong Kong and to like my friends there. And I'm speaking as somebody who wasn't on the ground during that time. I was based remotely, so my heart really does go out to the folks who were there on the ground and they're doing that work, and being in the protests. And that was a massive challenge, being in an environment um, where publications like mine were not supported by were not support not just not supported by the government, but also made illegal in some ways, in terms of censorship.
Yeah.
So there was a time in 2022 where a succession of independent publications shut down. They just shut down, and someone who was at that time, I had become the editor in chief of that publication. I just saw that and I thought, I was living in the UK by that time, and I had folks on the ground in Hong Kong, and obviously up until then I had always been like worried about my safety, their safety, more so because they are based in Hong Kong. It came to a point where I saw all this change. A lot of change had to be made to the actual content that we put out for their safety. Um, and I think I was at a point where I knew that things had to change with my career, for the sake of my, I think, mental health as well.
And what was the independent publication that you're working for? Was it news content they were putting out
Yes, it was
specifically?
news. Yeah, so we had a daily morning newsletter, which was our main product at that point. And where we
Yeah.
spent most
Yeah.
of our energy. It was called High Tide, and it was just like a daily briefing of the news in Hong Kong. And it was a really light-hearted, like not too difficult way to get a grasp of a snapshot of what was going on in the city. So that is what I did up until 2022. By 2022, I knew that I would be staying in the UK. Unfortunately, by that point, it was pretty clear that I would not be returning to Hong Kong long term. Um, and I think that had been obvious for a while, but something that I needed to come around to. Um, and I decided to pivot. As I said, I'd been in journalism for a long time, but I took interest in pivoting to content roles, but content roles, hoping to pivot to content roles in tech, in startups, and that led me to my last role, which was I was an editor, for an influencer marketing platform. So that was quite a massive pivot from what I was doing before.
Yes.
Yeah, which brings me to my recent professional career challenge, which is being made redundant.
Right. We've
Yeah,
all been there. I have been
yeah,
there.
yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not an outlier here, so I'm
Yeah.
just trying to make the best of it, like everybody else.
It's a difficult headspace, I think, more than anything. And a lot of people say it's opportunity, etc., etc. And I would say, yeah, when I got made redundant, it was the catalyst for me starting my own business. But at the time, it did not seem like a positive, fun experience because I was in the eye of the storm at the time, trying to think about financial stuff and what I'm going to do, and all right, if I'm setting up a business. And I think, yeah, it's a strange space to be in between what you want to do and also some bare essentials that you have to cover.
Mhm.
So let's see if we can help you. What are you looking for? What do you want to kind of continue? Are you looking for a new career path? Are you looking for something that do you know, or are you using this time to kind of evaluate what you want to do next?
It is hard to say. I am currently at a place where I was actually looking forward to spending some time off.
Nice.
I I am on the precipice of deciding, like, do I do what I love or do I do what I need to do to get to the next role?
Yeah,
Um, and while I can do both at the end of the day, given that I know how productive I am most days, I know that it needs to be like this or that. So I've been thinking about my Cantonese isn't very good, first and foremost, and I definitely regret that. And that's something that I would like to take this time to improve. But I also want to share more of my photography, work more on my Instagram content. I like to do like ESEA Eats content. I run like a little ESEA Eats fan page called Eating ESEA on Instagram, and I love to like share my food, but also not just share where I go and where I eat, but also kind of it's a great place where I share what's going on in the communities. And that's how one of the ways I discovered On Your Side, actually,
yeah,
as well as yeah, different resources. It's where I share things. It's where I meet new people, and it's yeah, it's a great space to post. And then I also have my own Instagram where I share more of my slow living and travel content. So while I'm kind of deciding between the two at the moment. But I will say I'm very happy that I have more time to work with ALC on the ESEA Eats campaign now as like a more permanent team member. Yeah.
yeah. Sure. I think it's as long as you are doing something where you are able to kind of have a little bit of enjoyment in your work. And let's face it, even when you're like working on your own Instagram pages, it's still work. As much as we try and kid ourselves, it's still work. So having a little bit of space to do what you want that's not to a strict regime is always nice in life, and you should take those opportunities.
Hmm.
Um, and just on the Asian Leadership Collective bit, as we come to a roundup,
Hmm.
what are the key things individuals and organisations can do to support representations or to support Asian Leadership Collective? Maybe give us like three things to take away.
Three things. Okay, great. So let me see if I can get to three. First of all, I think it's really important. I hadn't mentioned this before, but I will mention now. Um, Asian Leadership Collective has a great article on employee resource groups and how they are a fantastic way to create safe spaces within companies and amongst employees. And they're just for support. So, for example, East and Southeast Asians can get together within this company, keeping in mind that these are mainly like voluntary groups. Yeah, mostly voluntary groups, but I think it's important work that, and it's an important step that can be taken to support East and Southeast Asian representation and leadership. So I would say, first of all, go check out that article, and if you have the resources to start one in your place of employment, if you have the resources, have that kind of support, or join one, not just an ERG, but similar groups that exist outside of the corporate world that aim to uplift and support each other. I think great ones exist on Facebook. There's Subtle Asian Woman UK, which is actually how I discovered the ESEA Eats campaign. And there's also Subtle Asian UK. Asian Leadership Collective is mostly based. No, sorry, Asian Creative Network. Sorry, ACN. I'm
Oh,
jumbling
the acronyms.
all the acronyms. ACN is mostly US or read by, or it's mostly US based folks, but I think it's still a great way to see what's going on and connect with others and find support. So I would say, yeah, AERGs. Two, I would say professionals like look outside of your workplace for support as well. So those Facebook groups, for example, there are some great Slack groups as well. For a while, I've been a part of like a Journalists of Color Slack, and and I know that Asian Leadership Collective is hoping to create something similar where we can all support each other in a Slack group, and just discuss issues that we may have in our careers and how we can uplift each other. Um, and yeah, I guess third of all, I already mentioned on your side, but also ESEA Sisters is a great example of community grassroots
Yeah.
work, leadership work, and like we need to see more of those. I think it's great that we have Asian Leadership Collective, but I think it's sort of crazy that there hasn't been an Asian Leadership Collective until 2020. But I think it's great that we have it now. So I would say those are my three main points of what organizations and professionals can focus on.
Yeah, I would agree. So it's definitely, in terms of representation, we still need it. The data is an issue. Um, and finding resources for how can we support this. I mean, the key one is if you're not in a big corporate business and you're in a smaller business or you're just on your own, is find the signpostings. What we try and do is signpost so you can find communities that are local to you. I think definitely it's been an issue in the UK. Like you say, a lot of those groups, like the Facebook groups that exist, like the subtle Asian traits, they're mostly US based. So we tend to lack a little bit in the UK, these groups, but there are so many, yeah, ESA Voices, ESA Sisters, that are all UK based. I think we can, if we can signpost to those, you'll find people that will have experiences that resonate with you and that will help. And I think that's the main reason it's so important to have representation at leadership level, is because you can find someone to have those conversations with that you feel will have experiences that resonated with you. Because let's face it, going up the career ladder is never easy. And it's always hard to find a mentor. But if you can find a mentor that resonates with you, then it makes such a big difference. And my final question for you was around the International Women's Week theme, which was Embrace Equity. Um, so I have been asking the last couple of people that we've spoken with about their thoughts on um, equity and equality. So do you have any thoughts around that theme for International Women's Week this year?
Yes, so I would say that my thoughts are not originally coming from myself. I would have to shout out the folks who like my own thoughts stem from. Um, First of all, I did have a look at the website during International Women's Day, but um, a friend of mine, but also someone who does fantastic work in her community in London. Her name is Samantha Sun. Um, she 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 comes from a background of working in the sex worker communities um as a dancer and a performer, and she has a lot of experience there. But she also is a recent graduate of the London School of Economics.
Nice.
So in social innovation and enterprise, I may be getting that degree wrong, but so
It
she has
sounds
a
very
very
impressive.
yeah, she's got a very unique perspective, but I also think a very valuable one because the embrace equity. So you go to the International Women's Day page and you see all those images of women,
Yeah.
hugging themselves and embracing themselves, which is nice. But my first thought is, what does this contribute to the conversation? Maybe I was personally missing something, but on International Women's Day, my friend Samantha, she posted on her Instagram stories and basically discussed how the way that International Women's Day has been co-opted by corporations
Yes.
really strips
Great.
away the radical ideas that pushed us to where we got today. So, for example, from her perspective, it's I think International Women's Day is a great way to invite conversation, not just about women's equity in the workplace, but also the equity and better treatment of those who do not fall within the gender binary.
Yes.
So especially for her, myself as well, we exist in like in the queer communities, and we we both know and personally experience um like queerness, gender queerness, and folks who, especially who are trans, but trans folks also like trans folks of color, black trans people, non-binary folks. These folks need to be included in the conversation as well on and how we can support them, because I would argue that we are farther behind on addressing equity for these groups than we are for some for certain women, just due to, so I think an intersectional approach is really important. Not to say that of course women still deal with a lot in the workplace. There's a
Sure.
lot of work that needs to be done, but as somebody who has worked in spaces that are mainly woman led, and I think there's still a lot of work that can be done in these spaces, but of course in the wider picture. And I think I was lucky in those experiences as well, but I still have a lot of like critique. So I would say that overall, to round my thoughts up on International Women's Day, um, I think I think that from a corporate standpoint, we need. I'm not sure if these spaces are ready to have these conversations about making space for trans, non-binary, and other queer folks, and other folks who fall out of the gender binary. Um, but hopefully, it is done. It needs to be done, and I hope I can contribute to the work in a positive way. But sorry if I deviated from the.
No, I think it is. I think that point is very, very important and on point, actually, is that International Women's Day should not be another box checking exercise. It shouldn't be about the niceties. It should be about those radical ideas. And my own perspective, I took the equity part to be about accessibility, about like making sure that everybody has access to equal opportunities, um, whether they identify as female or all of the spectrum. Um, so yeah, I would agree with you, but that's my personal opinion. Is that yeah, I think it's important. I think women's rights are important, but I thought the equity theme this year had a little bit more a little bit more of an importance in accessibility. And um, in my past, I've worked on empowering women with tech as a northern based initiative. And for me, my question to that was always like, where's the parity? I agree. I think women's rights are important, but if we don't allow men and everybody else into the conversation, we will never see change, and we will never identify the next set of issues. And like you say, the more hard hitting radical things. So I don't think you're off topic at all. I think we're probably on the same line of thought of, it should really mean something more than the niceties of showcasing the women that work in your business, as important as they may be. Um,
Actually, sorry, I just wanted to build on your note of accessibility. That's really important. I think
yeah,
um, my friend Samantha also pointed out, of course, not all disabled people have visible disabilities, but
yeah,
I think my friend noted on the site that there wasn't really any representation of, or much as representation of folks of women with visible disabilities. And I think on the note of accessibility, that's where my mind goes to first. I have a friend, her name is, her Instagram name handle is Explore Disabled. Her name is Alicia. She does fantastic work. She's based in London, and she has created her own resource list and like reading list for folks who are interested in learning more about disabled history, how you can be a good also like allyship, how you can be a good ally to disabled folks, but also on her own page, she does great accessibility reviews of different restaurants in the UK, mostly in London.
Okay.
So I think it'd be interesting to ask her what her thoughts on that are. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, I will put those resources in, but I think, yeah, I think it's a well-rounded response to International Women's Day. I think it's an important thing, like, we're fighting for women's rights, but also that term female covers a wider spectrum than it did before. And are we allowing everybody into the conversation and fighting for their rights, or at least, being an ally or signposting or talking about all the other things that exist now and all the other areas that we need to address. So no, that was a really, thank you for preparing a response to that. I appreciate it. A lot of us have had to kind of, when we saw that topic theme come up, we had to have a little look and understand quite what was meant by that. But thank you today for the chat, Jasmine. I really appreciate it. I think we covered a lot of ground. And I'll pop all of the links into the bottom of this that will go on our YouTube channel and onto the podcast. And we'll add your handle in there. What's coming up for Asian Leadership Collective? Is there anything that we can send people to, or for yourself? Is there anywhere we can send people to follow what you're doing next?
Well, first of all, definitely give Asian Leadership Collective a follow on Instagram. That's the handle, super straightforward. I've got a lot of exciting things in the works for the ESEA Eats campaign. So definitely follow ALC on Instagram. Keep an eye out on what we've got. LinkedIn, Twitter as well, if you're active on those platforms. I highly encourage you follow us there. Um, Also, my own little project, Eating ESEA, if you want to know about events, different ESEA events, not just in London, but I try to grab as much as I can from all around the UK. That's a great place for like food as well. If you want to look at your Instagram to feel hunger, I'm sure as you said about your own Instagram, the Little Yellow Rice Co. I am on Instagram at Where is Jasmine Lee. I mainly post about slow travel, slow living, but also pre-loved fashion and my obsession around like buying pre-loved and trying to live more sustainably and ethically.
Nice.